Hi, everybody. This is Dr. David P. Perrodin, and welcome to the Week 6 Fireside Chat for Educational Leadership 655, Pupil Services and Non-Discrimination with Viterbo University in La Crosse, Wisconsin. This week begins on Monday, February 23rd, and concludes on Sunday, March 1st, 2026. A reminder that your learning team assignment is due on Sunday, February 22nd. Only one person in your team needs to update it. Your research module will begin on Monday, March 9th. So we are nearing the home stretch of this course. A recap: child and human trafficking. Some of you found limited professional development resources in your districts. This might be an area that would be best addressed as a consortium professional development event. And I wanted to make you aware of Dr. Justin Patchen with UW-Eau Claire. Since 2022, he has been exploring the intersection of teens and technology with particular focus on cyberbullying, online social networking, and sexting. He travels across the country and abroad, training educators, counselors, law enforcement, parents, and youth on how to prevent and respond to adolescent misuses of technology. I have attended some presentations by Dr. Patchen and was very impressed. He will also come to districts in Wisconsin. That's where, if you work with your neighboring districts, potentially contact Justin Patchen and see if he would be available to come in to present to your staff and then also to do a community presentation. And something that sticks with me from a presentation he gave maybe 15 years ago when Facebook was new and it was all the rage with kids was just going through and identifying from pictures that people would post, the kids would post, and you could tell from the pictures where they were at, who was in the background, the name of a place, and things like this. And pretty soon you could create this whole mosaic. And in the wrong hands, as Dr. Patchen would point out, that information could very quickly lead a predator to the proximity of where that youth might be. So again, Dr. Justin Patchen, sometimes we don't realize the true stars, the incredible assets that we have right in our own backyard. Dr. Justin Patchen, UW-Eau Claire. Also expect that your CISA and your state organizations dig into this uncomfortable area. I'll go through presentation flyers for different conferences, and this is under addressed. And again, working with your CISA and seeing what professional development they offer. If it's not what you deem will match your district, say, hey, this is what I need. What could you develop? Again, if you're seeing the need, it's likely your neighboring districts in that CISA are seeing the same need. Embrace and step into the advocacy roles. So just going back and looking, it was May 4th, 1980, President Jimmy Carter signed the Department of Education Organization Act into law. So we've had our Department of Education at a federal level since 1980. It was 1975 that Congress enacted Public Law 94-142, known as the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, or really the beginning of IDEA. So in looking at both of those, I'm older than both of those. They haven't been around that long. So looking at a big picture, two things. One is we've done a lot in a short amount of time for advancing pupil services, for advancing services and access for students with disabilities. I remember when I was in elementary school and PL 94-142 passed in the 70s. And after it passed, outside of the building showed up a yellow mobile home. And the yellow mobile home was the special education service location. At that time, it was a location. It was the place that you went for services, and no one really knew much about it, except it was out there. Occasionally, some students, a friend of mine, John, would be missing for a class, and you'd come back. You always had these really cool stickers. But at that point, it was really a place. So I think sometimes we look very critically at special education and pupil services, and we don't recognize, hey, that we've done a lot in really 50 years. So we need to also to celebrate and kind of look at that trajectory. Meet with your elected officials. This is something I did and actually continue to do. Your representatives in the state, if you contact them, they will often set up either appointment where you can meet with them for coffee. Dave Considine was my local state elected representative, and he was on the chair of the education committee, and we would meet for coffee in Baraboo and talk about special education. We would talk about school safety. Contact organizations that you are a member of, such as OSSA and WCAS. And again, if you have areas where you think a presentation might be worthwhile, such as STAC. We talked about that in Racine County. Presentations would be very appropriate on human trafficking. I think, again, you're contacting your organizations and representing the needs that you see, and then asking them to, okay, can you canvas either for presenters, or better yet, like maybe how this has been approached at a countywide level. I think Sarah was talking about that. I will return your Great at Learning team assignment next week. And as we get into that with Bruce, and you're kind of finishing that up, the EpiPens. So when I was a student services director, my nurses would collect the expired EpiPens. They only last a couple of years. Instead of just like throwing them out, they would have a grapefruit or a few grapefruits, and they would do staff trainings and have staff use an EpiPen and jab a grapefruit, and then it would activate the auto injector. So they would actually get the feel of what it would be like for that device to be activated. So I thought that was really innovative. So your insurers for your school, whoever provides your health insurance or your errors and omissions, pharmacies, Lion clubs, I would approach all of those and ask for donations for EpiPens. I don't think I ever paid for an EpiPen as a Pupil Services Director. I think all the EpiPens were donated. Another thing I learned, you can put this in your plan, you don't have to put this in your plan, but again, it was from a consortium where we had other districts together, and we talked about allergy management. And one nurse said, I worked in, whatever setting, and it was different from a school setting, and maybe like a camp or something like that. And she said, when we would administer an EpiPen, we would also have a marker, right, that I think was like taped to the EpiPen, and you would take the marker out and you'd write on the child's arm like 1:14 p.m. That was the time it was administered, because then if that child goes by ambulance somewhere, they know the time that the EpiPen was administered, because the effect only lasts for so long. But I think it was the fact that it was a little marker taped it right to the various EpiPens, so they would have that available. I thought it was ingenious. So again, this is a pollination where you get people together, districts together, and people start sharing, and you're like, whoa, that makes a lot of sense. What is this? It's $1 for this marker. Week 6 shout outs. Renee shared several resources for helping support children from immigrant or refugee families who might be fearful for their well-being and the well-being of their family and their friends. So thank you for doing that, Renee. These really resonate with chapter I wrote in the Velocity of Information, Human Thinking During Chaotic Times, which explored how children perceive the world, specifically their temporal perception during periods of crisis, like the pandemic and kind of what is happening now with immigration enforcement activities. So temporal, meaning the passage of time. And here's what I mean by that. Again, I wrote about this. One point I emphasized is that adults often overlook how much more deeply sentinel events, for example, right now, impact children. Because children have a shorter life history, these events represent a much larger percentage of their lived experience. So here's the example. 1 year is 10% of a 10-year-old's life, but it's only 2% of a 50-year-old's life. So that disproportionate weight can make traumatic or uncertain times feel far more permanent to a child. Furthermore, children possess much more limited patterning skills than adults. While an adult can look at a crisis and recognize it as temporary disruption in a long sequence of life events, a child lacks that historical data. So again, this is a very important part. And Renee, thanks for pointing that out. And I think it's this whole concept, it's time dilation, but understanding that the way that children interpret events is much different. One, because they haven't lived that long, and two, they just haven't honed their patterning skills yet. I've also seen how these anxieties manifest in school settings. Increased immigration enforcement has made it incredibly difficult for some districts to host simple family events like movie nights. I hear this a lot. I've heard this actually since the pandemic, and now again, I'm hearing this when I instruct courses, when I'm talking with administrators. I recently spoke with a school administrator who noted a significant drop in attendance, specifically among migrant youth, as the fear of being in public spaces often outweighs the desire for community connection. This raises a difficult question for us as school leaders. Do we wait out the storm by scaling back these events to avoid compounding that fear? Or does that withdrawal inadvertently signal a surrender of the communal anchors we've worked to build? So just think about that. Arlie wrote about naloxone on school premises and stated students who require naloxone administration are still entitled to privacy under FERPA and disability protections. Policies must ensure. And Arlie had a very thorough, bulleted response. Very well done. And here are just a few excerpts from that. She indicated medical information is handled confidentially. Yes, there's no automatic public disclosure. And students are not subjected to unnecessary discipline simply because medical intervention occurred. And I think that last statement is very, very important, right? And here's why. I want to center on, again, students are not subjected to unnecessary discipline simply because medical intervention occurred. That distinction is critical. When this is communicated clearly to both students and staff, it removes a significant barrier of the apprehension that stepping in to help might trigger punitive consequences. It also helps dismantle the immediate stigma of someone being labeled as an addict or that kid is a druggie or they're all messed up, which is ridiculous, right? But shifting the focus from punishment to care and safety, viewing it as a medical event, treating it, and then globally getting more information if this is there's some type of intervention as far as a program or supports through the school or through hospital or the community to assist that student, assist the family. But really, Arlie, really keen framing through your whole response. Very impressive. Sarah talked about AODA counselors who provided a presentation for educators and focused on current substance abuse trends in her county, community resources and harm reduction strategies, including the availability of free vending machines that provide Narcan and other safety supplies. This approach appears aimed at increasing staff awareness and preparedness rather than delivering direct instruction to students. Sarah had shared that. My response, Sarah, you mentioned your county, so I immediately wondered if the county's community health needs assessment addresses awareness, treatment, and cessation efforts related to AODA. So I looked it up and I downloaded your community's China Community Health Needs Assessment, looked at pages 20 through 27, and those focus specifically on the areas which you are mentioning, including youth AODA. So become familiar with that. And the question is, if you're reading through this and it's like, whoa, like I'm not sure anybody from the school is involved with this, or if they were, like we didn't have a follow-up on how this interface happens between the community medical providers and the school. So it's there, right? It's documented. So check that out. Your post reminded me of an evening AODA presentation I attended in a district. The panel included school counselors, a county human services representative, a police officer, a pharmacist, and a physician. Each brought a distinct perspective. The pharmacist, I remember this very well. The pharmacist shared how prescribed medications were being misused locally and shared images of commonly abused pills, such as Xanax, so families could recognize them. The police officer spoke about where drug transactions were occurring, including a parking lot behind a private school next to a church. just minutes from the interstate. It underscored how activity often happens in places people would not initially suspect. And when I read through your post, a number of you talked about this, saying, here was a site that I think one site was right across the road from like a police station, right? And so getting in and having those discussions and kind of getting to know the very workings of the community. So nice job, Sarah. Mason wrote, I firmly believe that most people only see human trafficking through the lens of movies. As such, it is our responsibility to teach on human trafficking and grooming, especially as it relates to our students with disabilities who will proportionately be the highest and most easily taken advantage of within the population. So that is a very hard-hitting paragraph and on the mark from Mason. So, and I think I took an excerpt from that, seeing human trafficking through the lens of movies. Like that would be perfect for a title for a presentation at WCAS ASA WASB conference, like right there. So, when I'm actually, teaching classes and we kind of are brainstorming, I will have a notebook and I'll pause and be like, I'll write this down because like this should be a presentation somewhere. So my response to Mason, what you shared reminds me of a story a superintendent told in a legal course I was teaching 2 years ago. So one of my students, he explained that the interstate exit just a mile from his small community's high school was a known trafficking hub. Law enforcement was aware and actively working the issue, yet the scope of it felt overwhelming. When this information was shared with parents, many were stunned. I mean, they grew up in the community and they really weren't aware that this was happening. The perception that this doesn't happen here quickly dissolved. In response, the district implemented more stringent visitor protocols for campus access. During my time as a Pupil Services Director, I met monthly with our local police department and participated in several ride-alongs each year. Those experiences were invaluable. They gave me a clear understanding of the community from a law enforcement perspective. For example, officers pointed out a storage unit facility that was frequently broken into because drugs were being temporarily stored there. It wasn't about casting aspirations on the community. It was about understanding realities that often remain unseen. So that's something I would recommend to each of you, is to consider a ride along, especially if you're interviewing for a pupil services position. I would mention that during my interview is would be that I'm going to work with law enforcement. I'm going to do a periodic ride along to better understand the community. Again, not just the negatives of the community, but where the different activities and action happen in the community. And some of this can be very useful for understanding routes for students walking, and then also supervision that you might have close to the school during the morning or the afternoons. Moodle! School safety is now part of the formal or informal job description of every Pupil Services Director. This is addressed in greater depth in the Educational Leadership 651 Special Education Legal Issues course. But so some of this might be redundant, but it's still very important, and to look at it through the pupil services lens. Again, students with anxiety accessing safety drills, English language learners accessing safety drills, migrant students who, for example, may not be in school for various reasons, or students who attend part of their school experience virtually and part in person. How are they informed of different school safety practices because maybe they're not in school during drill days? So we're going to talk about school safety, crisis preparedness, investigations, and that K-12 scope and sequence document, which I've been talking about before. It's there this week. Also, your FEMA school multi-hazard emergency planning course is due March 7th. Just let me double check that. Yes, it is due March 7th. So I went in and took that course a few weeks ago because FEMA, that course was temporarily shut down during the government shutdown, and I wanted to make sure it was still accessible. So yes, when you'll have to set up your own ID number for that. It is not a social security number. And then once you complete the course, you'll receive a certificate, a PDF that you will then send to me from the time of setting up your ID to completing the course, taking the course, completing your certificates, probably about 90 minutes. So when you take that, assume the lens of a pupil services director. Safety training for ELL, students with anxiety, 504, disabilities, keep this certificate. So I would also use it for your resume, share it with your Board of Education that you took this FEMA approved course. And now you have this FEMA certificate. Actually, FEMA then will keep a transcript. There's other courses you can take, and I identify those in this week that also boost your awareness for hazard planning, for example, for students in a school setting. So in addition to just you taking it, I think it could be other administrators that you make aware and they take this. Administrators could take this as a cohort. So my PBS school safety presentations, matters of mental health and student profiling are available. So those have 2013 and 2019. It's interesting because my 2019 presentation, the latter portion of it, I focused on deepfakes and how schools were going to need to revise policy and protocols to handle deepfakes. And of course, right now, what's happening? Schools are having to deal with deepfakes 7 years later. So believe it or not, back in 2019, deepfakes were emerging already as a pretty significant problem for schools.
Hello, Dr. Perrodin. Yes, deepfakes must be addressed by school staff. How do you investigate them? Also, hello to Arlie, Mason, Sarah, and Renee. You are all superstar students. Keep up the great work.
I have an example of the 5-year DPI Pupil Services Nondiscrimination report. Your district does that every 5 years. So see if you can locate it. It's supposed to be posted on your website. Balance the quantitative, which is numbers, with qualitative, which is interviews. People go heavy on the the numbers. People also need to bring in qualitative. It just gives a much richer picture. School counseling, the K-12 scope and sequence. That document, I strongly recommend that you create something like that in your district. Now you can do it as a Google Docs. You can go in and modify it with your counselors, social workers, psychologists periodically throughout the year. I would add a heading for trafficking awareness. I would specifically mention this as something I would do again if I was seeking a pupil services administrative position, that within my first year, I am going to, involve my staff. We're going to create this scope and sequence document, and then we're going to be informed from that where we need to increase or balance out our activities, and then we would be updating that at least twice a year and doing a brief update with the Board of Education when we did that. Also, during this week, Pupil Services legal questions and answers. Think about frequently asked questions about pupil services, such as custody issues, harassment via social media, etc. This type of presentation is always best to do in the format of providing the questions to the attorney ahead of time and then sticking to that set of questions during the presentation. An attorney will seldom and shouldn't answer complex questions asked in the moment. Also, you want to know how the attorney's responses align with your policies and practices. An example would be, so again, this is something I experienced as a pupil services director. A staff member believed that they were the recipient of bullying from a community member who was a parent of a child with a disability. So this parent would be posting on their blog negative things about the teacher, negative things about the school. The teacher thought the school should intervene in this. And actually, when I contacted our legal counsel reviewed the blog and said, there's nothing the school can do legally on this. There aren't threatening statements with this. This is a parent's opinion. So it was disappointing for that staff member to hear that because they felt unsupported by the school. I actually did contact the parent, went to the parent's workplace. The parent invited me. They owned a business, and we sat down, and I was able to convince the parent to remove these posts and then seek the school, the administrator, and the person to have these direct discussions versus putting things like that online. Just, kind of framing it in the bigger picture of, for the whole district, we don't want to kind of just make it appear that everything is dysfunctional, and that's really not happening. And certainly we have opinions that don't align, but So I wouldn't expect, though, that is always going to be the end result in instances like this. So the attorney came in and had that question thoroughly answered, and had cases where this had come up, and actually what defamation was, what libel was, so people could work on their own. And also saying, like, if you think there's something, you're being attacked personally outside or threatened, then here's the resources to access. So anyway, basically what that boils down to is you are working with your attorney on this kind of like a top 10 list. And it's like, what do we do with students with custody issues? What do we do with, for example, somebody who might be posting things online about staff members? And we keep going down on this, and then have the attorney come in and answer that. So we have a discussion question focused on that. I found this to be really helpful. Reflecting, teaching, annotation. Litigation is almost impossible to avoid in today's schools. Act in the best interest of the child. Document and be aware of Board of Education policy. Most school legal issues are procedural in nature, so how you informed your decisions is important. So again, it's less about did you make the right decision, it's what information did you use to inform your decision. We saw this throughout the pandemic, when schools will be in session or not in session, if they require mask or not mask. It really came down to procedure of how are you informing those decisions. Were you talking to your school nurse, the county nurse? Were you using Johns Hopkins data? Like, what was coming in to inform your decision? So it's, again, I will state it. It is more important to focus on how you are informing your decisions than the actual decisions. That might sound counterintuitive, right? Because we're assuming you're going to make the informed decision what you felt was in the best interest. But what did you do to inform that decision? Review your job description. You might find that you're responsible for an area or areas in which you don't have appropriate training or support. When seeking employment as a Pupil Services Director, request the job description. In School of Errors, I extensively discuss the benefits of various school tabletop exercises for professional development. You will need to anticipate the needs of students with disabilities, anxiety, English language learners in the event of a power outage, a cyber attack, evacuation, or intruder. So there are numerous tabletop exercises available from the FEMA REMS TA toolbox, and that is linked out in class. So, tabletop activities, again, I would conduct a few tabletop activities a year. I actually conducted one at UW-Madison a number of years ago, talking about tabletop activities. What I would emphasize at a tabletop activity, and we do this in the Educational Leadership 702 superintendent class. People are assigned different roles. You're the superintendent, you're the principal, you're the food service director, you're the director of transportation, whatever. And in that case, there's a power outage, and we go through 20 minutes. I am throwing curveballs in there too of, some different things that are kind of developing. But the thing that we look at afterwards is, were you making decisions? Did you just stall out, or did you make decisions? And then we group the decisions. Was this about communication? Was it about logistics and so forth? And that's amazing to do. So basically, every time a decision was made, we would enter it into a running Google document. At 1 minute and 21 seconds, this decision was made. At 2 minutes and 8 seconds, this decision was made. At the 9-minute mark, this decision was made. And then you can go back very safely. You're telling people, this is not a gotcha moment. And we go back and we kind of take these and code them, which ones were communication and so forth. And I remember one time, a group would say, early on, like in that first 3 minutes, we should have been communicating back to our 4 case sites what was going on, because we didn't communicate with them until like later on, and we needed to get them on board early of what was happening. So it's those type of things, again, that aren't sophisticated. People feel energized and they come into a safe space of, we're not evaluating your decision, we're evaluating that you made decisions, right? That the timeline kept moving. In a syllabus, or the syllabus, week 6 and 7 are together. In School of Errors, read chapter 18, instant command structure, and also chapter 28, bollards and planters. Think about the Pupil Services Director's expectation to understand ICS, instant command systems, and also about accessibility and safety devices. We have a lot of bizarre things that are put into schools that make schools less accessible for students. For example, in School of Airs, there is a picture that I took of bollards placed in front of a school, which would make it very difficult for students in larger wheelchairs to navigate. It's kind of like a game of Frogger. The final assignment paper about existing pupil services practices can be done in the alternate format of a 20-minute phone call with me. I will soon provide that shared Google document. There's several dates and times, so you'll sign up. It's very self-explanatory, but I'm not going to open it up until about mid-March. So, you're probably looking for it. It'll open up, and then you'll sign up for a time. Again, it's a 20-minute phone call. I will have my timer. We get to 20 minutes. It'll be done. So, all right, everybody, our week 6 Fireside Chat. And again, we are nearing that inflection point of getting to the second half of class. And soon you're going to be into your research module, and then things kind of really open up for your time to go and meet with people and to talk and to soak up what is happening in the district, and that qualitative side of maybe interviewing some students, interviewing some staff, going and spending some time on the website. And it took me this long to find whatever. So to become really informed at a gradual pace, because now you know what to look for, right? I mean, we've gone through this class. You've got feedback from your peers, feedback from me, and information here, so you know what to look for, so you can identify that and get it prepared for your pupil services final exam phone call. All right, everybody. I guess we are back to winter here, at least where I am. I have the jacket back. So thank you very much.